All right. Well, are you ready to send your husband, son or nephew, daughter, relative into war? The military may be calling for a return to the draft. So this makes the war with Russia a very different story, doesn't it? The wars that the U.S. entered in the last 30 or so years have been arm's length away from the middle and upper classes, the young men and women who fought in Afghanistan, Iraq. They were from more largely poor and urban families. They were not the children of Western elites by and large. And this has allowed the U.S. to wage war without too much backlash because it's not the most vocal who make the biggest sacrifices. Now, it's just sort of, upsets us on the news a little. We hear it in the background and we're able to go on with our lives. That is literally the entire premise of Rachel Maddow's first book, Draft, from 2012. She makes the case that most Americans do not interact with the military in the way they once did, so it doesn't cost us personally. So we can ignore these wars. It's kind of amazing that over 10 years ago that even the liberal left press was comfortable promoting peace rhetoric, speaking out about the military expansion. They don't do that anymore. Now MSNBC's star anchor is one of the most war promoters. Like, Russia's the number one enemy. We need to go to war with them.
We need to build up our military in order to take on both China and Russia simultaneously.
Yeah.
We need to build up, and because we don't have the forces right now, so we actually need to build up our forces, and we need to do this through a draft. We need to have these numbers because we just don't have the numbers right now. And how are we going to fight both Russia and China simultaneously? This is what MSNBC pushes.
Yes, they push this now, but 10 years ago, they were comfortable pushing Rachel Maddow's book about the horror of military expansion and how it will creep up on us if it is not a sacrifice for all of us evenly, which it is not. So it's kind of amazing how far they've pushed away peace rhetoric. But she was right. The military has relied on recruitment from the poorest classes, and the poorest classes have suffered the death toll in countless wars in the Middle East that never should have been. But what if that changes? This is a military.com op-ed calling for a return to the draft. And this publication is generally a pretty good temperature for the pulse of the military and military rhetoric. We will note that it's an opinion piece, but it sufficed to scare me to death as the mother of a teenage boy. I'm not speaking against military service. I want to make that crystal clear. I am speaking against wasting young lives in useless wars. I respect the military, and I don't want anyone at risk needlessly. I hope you can appreciate that distinction. Now, the author notes that enrollment is down. This is something we've been warned about as of late. The Army says that it will be 15,000 recruits short of its 65,000 recruit target. The Navy says it will be 10,000 recruits short of its 38,000 recruit target. The Air Force says it will be 3,000 recruits short of its 27,000 recruit target. The Marine Corps is the only one that says we will hit our recruitment target, but it's been a struggle to do so. Now, according to the Pentagon data, only 9% of young people said that they would consider military service as their career. That's down from 13%. I mean, think of it. That's not even 1 in 10. Go ahead.
I was going to say, think about back in like the 40s and 50s and stuff. It was like a man's honor to go in and serve in the military. Like, people were like, I'm going to go into the military as a career.
Yes.
People were excited to do it. And now that all of these wars are happening and we're being the policemen of the world, people are losing faith in the military. And they have never had to draft during non-war times. I mean, the times that they drafted was major offensives, right? Offensives. It wasn't during peacetime.
No, of course.
We're still in peacetime, but...
Yeah, exactly. It was Korea. It was right after the Cuban Missile Crisis and into the Vietnam War,
yes.
Right? And so, he makes the point in this piece that because of the last two massive wars that we've had, they've been unsuccessful. These two massive 20-year wars that we've had have been unsuccessful.
Well,
and
think about
that's why these numbers are down.
Right. And think about the way the military is presented. Now, I've just this year read David Goggins' book, who was a Navy SEAL and an Army Ranger.
No, well, he went through Army Ranger training, but didn't actually get past it.
Okay. And I also have read Chelsea Manning's book. Now, a lot of times these recruitment efforts, especially on these memoirs, are about like, hey, you're down on your luck. You don't come from a wealthy family. You don't have any other options. Join the military and we'll make something out of you. And otherwise you would be nothing. And the reason they recruited David Goggins to do this job was to go into Black communities and show them like, hey, you're kind of screwed anyway. Come to the military, right? And so it's now presented to people who have not really a lot of options in life, instead of being presented as an opportunity for pride and advancement.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even in my day and age, like when I was a kid, they had like the GI Bill, and you could go in and you could make a career and then come out and get college credits. Like there was things about it that even I was convinced in looking into it, because I was like, well, that sounds kind of cool that I could go in, get some college credits, come out and use that money and everything to do it. Like they don't have that anymore. Now they just show you are like the commercials are people with weapons and technology and all this other stuff.
Right.
Well, it is like a modern form of slavery, if you think about it, right? You're basically taking these people, and a draft would adversely affect poorer populations in the United States, and people of wealth and means can get out of it. That's exactly what happens. And so it would adversely affect poor and lower middle class individuals, and it would push them into a form of like modern slavery.
Right.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And, what is the selling point after all of these wars? Even as the piece points out, he says that after 2 decades of war, both of which ended unsuccessfully, there's, low recruitment now. Well, unsuccessful wars, if you read what the military calls the AAR, or the After Action Review, you wouldn't sign up for this either if you looked through those wars. In this opinion piece, he says that the low opinion of the military is really politicians' faults because they sort of use it as a pawn in their political play. Or maybe it's the needless dying and the fact that people don't want to put their life at risk for something that they think is, a needless war. You can't really put a good PR spin on that.
And tell us what successful would have been. Like what would successful look like?
Right, I know. Unsuccessful. Like we did exactly what we set out to do, which was totally destabilize the Middle East. So what is this? What is a successful war in Iraq?
Us owning it, still having our bases there, like successfully?
Yeah, we already do.
What does that look like?
I guess in Afghanistan, I don't know. We pilfer
everything.
We pilfer all their minerals and resources. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it is amazing. It is amazing to think about it in those terms, right?
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Now, the draft is presented as a cost saver because apparently it costs $15,000 to recruit each new member, putting a total on this of about $2 billion annually, I suppose. Now, it's worth noting, though, not only, are they asking people to sign up for, to sign on to endless wars, but also the suicide rate is really high for U.S. veterans. Look at this research showing that 16.8 veterans die by suicide every day. That is an insane number. 16.8 veterans taking their own life every day.
Jeez.
Many of them report being unable to live with what they saw when they were deployed, or what they themselves did when they were asked to do, or what they saw being done to other human beings. Many of them simply can't reconcile having lost friends and colleagues to these pointless wars. Now, interestingly enough, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say really quick, I heard a guy that put it a great way. He said he fought harder when he got home for benefits and help with what happened to him over there than he fought in the whole war.
Yeah.
The battle was harder, he said.
Well,
and that just kind of puts it in perspective.
Now, I want to sort of put a highlighter here on this idea that so many veterans have mental health disorder. I would argue this is not a disorder. This is a normal human reaction to having seen horrors, right? I think that we pretend that veterans who've seen these terrible things are now diseased because they can't handle it. I feel like that's more a sign of health, that they can't handle it. Unless you're a psychopath and you can easily compartmentalize that stuff. No one's meant to handle it. And I think this all brings up the uncomfortable question about the war that we're facing right now. Do people who support dragging on the war in Ukraine only support it because they're risking other people's sons and not our own? Would you feel differently if it were your family or your son at risk? I think it's also worth noting that even Ukrainians do not want to be drafted into this war any more than you might want your family members drafted. Take a look at this. This week, the SBU said it uncovered an underground draft dodging service in Ukraine that helps people avoid military service for about $6,000 apiece. Ukraine doesn't have a draft anymore. They have a full-on mobilization. They have an order for all men of military age to report for duty. Or rather report for death, given how many of them are losing their lives trying to take back territory that does not want to be a part of Ukraine.
So today we got new numbers on the war in Ukraine. And you wonder why they're trying to get away from this mobilization. The new numbers that came out today show that about 400,000 Ukrainians have been killed. Let me repeat that. 400,000 have been killed. And upwards of 2 million have been wounded. Either permanently wounded, loss of limb, mentally incapacitated, doesn't matter. 400,000 dead. So you want to throw more people into a meat grinder like that? Absolutely not. And that's exactly, I think that's why you're seeing these numbers so low. For what? What are we fighting for?
Well,
so we can go to the Middle East and destabilize these countries? What are we doing?
Think about every single interview we've had on this show and every interview that we've seen from Ukrainian soldiers. Have any of them sounded like they knew what they were there for and that they were excited to be there? Not a single one that I've heard.
Well, NBC reporters from the United States are excited to be there.
Right. MSNBC reporters are like, I've enough talk. I'm done talking. So I'm showing up here now.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I would say aside from one battalion, by the way.
Okay. While we're thinking about this war, let's just look at the map as it stands today and why lives are currently being lost. Here is from RIA's war map from today, August 3rd. The red is what we broadly call the Donbass, the area that has been bombed by the Ukrainian army since 2014 and has been begging Russia to intervene. In fact, in 2015, the International Monetary Fund threatened to cut Ukraine off from loans unless it stopped spending $1 million per day to terrorize this region in red that they want back. Russia intervened last year and took over most of that area, but the dark gray that you see there is still part of the area that wants to be Russia, voted to be Russia, but Russia does not have control over yet. Now, Ukraine's counteroffensive was meant to push that red part back and turn it white, solidly in Ukraine's control. They did not do that, so they continue to throw young people's bodies. If you just keep looking at this map, they're basically throwing lives against that red line where it turns gray. Trying to see if they can push it back. They're not going to. Basically, they're like flies in a fly zapper. Now, given that people there want to be Russia, have wanted that by a large majority since 2014, as shown by this 2014 article saying that Ukrainians want Russia to invade in this region, they have been waiting. They voted. Why does their vote not count? Why does their vote necessitate young people to die for that? So again, when you see this article, would you throw your son, brother, husband, or father into that fly zapper? Does this influence your desire to be a peace activist, given that wars would no longer be at the arm's length from the majority of us? Now, this is not just a hypothetical. Just this week, President Biden called up 3,000 reservists to deploy to Europe. So they are, in fact, reaching to the bottom of the barrel. If they get there, it's all of us, all of our lives at risk. So again, if we get there and a draft is necessary, in the words of Effie, may the odds be ever in your favor.
It's really tragic because you wish that Washington would maybe sit back and say, maybe we should analyze this need for all of these hundreds of thousands of people, right? As Dwight D. Eisenhower realized that he had lost control at the end of his presidency and warned everybody in his farewell speech, beware the military-industrial complex. He was saying that because he'd already lost it. He'd already lost control of it. And now it is as massive as it is. Maybe it's time to reassess and say, hey, maybe the aggression that we take out around the world is not necessary. To have this massive standing army, to, as he writes, and as members of Congress have said, the need for the draft is so we can fight basically two wars. The need is to basically fight a two-frontal war against Russia and China. That is not, we would be destroyed if that happens. So that's the mentality right now among members of Congress, former members like Adam Kinzinger and others who've called for a draft and who have called for this larger mobilization of forces in the United States. Maybe it's time to pull back and say, hey, maybe this aggression, this massive military-industrial complex is the problem. But you have bipartisan support on this stuff in Washington.
Right, which again begs the question, if it's your kids, do you feel differently, right? Or if it's, someone in the chat said, send Congress. They're all way past the draft age.
I was going to say
they're
kids,
all too old.
Yeah, Dianne Feinstein's children, I have no idea.
It would be her great-grandchildren that are
Remember
eligible.
when Michael Moore was walking on the steps there on that documentary, asking them if they'd send their kids?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And well, I just want to say something also about the selective service thing and the idea of registering. There's this whole it's a canard, right? If you think about it, I remember when I had to register for the Secret Service.
Mm-hmm.
When I turned, was it 16 you have to do it, or 18? I forget. Do you remember,
18.
Dave? 18. As a young man in America, you have to go register for the selective service, to be drafted. As a young boy in America, that's what you have to do. You have to go to the post office and fill out those forms. And I remember thinking at the time, they've sent me letters ahead. They've sent me stuff. And I've thought about this over the years, this idea that you need to register.
Yeah. They already knew.
They already know. They already have, they have the census information. They have our tax information. They have my parents. They know exactly where I am. I mean, again, they know that why do I have to go register for anything? It's like a ceremonial thing. I don't know what they want me to do to register for the selective service. They already know everything about me.
Yeah.
It's a dog and pony show.
Now, it's one thing in certain countries like Mexico or Israel where you have compulsory military service for everyone between a certain age. It's one thing to have those in countries that are not waging wars around the world. It's quite a different thing to be drafted into a country that thinks war is fun, thinks war is the business of the day, thinks that literally that's the way they run the show.
Yeah,
right?
Vivek Ramaswamy in his book Woke Incorporated. It's a great book, by the way. And he makes the argument that one of the things that actually brings certain countries together is that mandatory military service, because then young men of all classes, it's not just rich and versus poor, and poor go into it and rich don't.
Yeah.
In some cases, and I know that there are exceptions, but for the most part, it's all, so you get this sort of melding of classes, and you don't have the class problems that you have in other countries.
Well, and it's also,
that's Vivek's
they're doing
argument.
projects for the community and for people, and they're out there around people. So it's not like you're in this, box of like our military. Could you imagine having somebody screaming in your face and calling you a dirtbag and deprogramming you from civilian life so that you can be this machine of a soldier? Most countries don't do that. They don't break them down.
Don't they? I didn't.
No, I think they more try to lift them up in some
service.
But there are no pro-peace. Yeah. I mean, there's no one in Congress that's pro-peace. I mean, you're hard-pressed to find anybody. I mean, what happened to people like Bernie Sanders? They were supposed to be pro-peace, anti-war.
Tulsi Gabbard, but she was sent the heck out of there, for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Justin Amash.
So you get pushed out of here. Anyway, let us know your thoughts on this in the comments. Colonel Doug.
And whether or not you think it would change the temperature for increasing war rhetoric supporting Ukraine, or would people say, oh, wait a minute, this involves me, I feel a little bit different. Would that change it? Would that change the appetite?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts on that in the comments. Colonel Douglas McGregor is going to join us next. We're going to talk about, he's just written a new piece, and I want to ask him about that, basically saying Ukraine is now a graveyard. And pushing for peace. We'll talk to him about that. Also, Tucker exposes the Biden crime family with a bombshell interview. We're going to talk about that coming up. Patrick Lancaster joins us from the front lines with a new report that is unbelievable. You'll want to see that. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.